Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. Chronologically, it's not really important. It's autumn, basically. It is autumn. I like to say autumn in New York. I think that was a movie. I'm not sure. But this is a very special panel. It's called Tales of Wonder and Dread. And it's a book that was recently published through Gary Hill. And it's a collection of science fiction and horror tales. And this is an eminent panel that we put together. Each panel member, Gary Hill, Keith Alberts, Patrick Murphy, have all written and are extensive authors. And this is just a great, this is a great intro to this holiday coming up called Halloween. So the timing is kind of perfect. So I've been looking forward to this. I've done my extracurricular reading of some of your works. So I get the emotionality cooking inside me and to share this with everybody. So this session, Tales of Wonder and Dread, goes along with the publication. Your timing was great, Gary. I didn't have it, and thank you for sending it to me. So I think first things first, let's do a little bio, a little introduction. I'll start on the top left there. Gary, take it away, and let's get to know.
Yeah, I've been on quite a few of these with you, Calvin. So I think probably the viewers are starting to get an idea of who I am, but sort of the short of it, I started Music Street Journal doing music reviews and interviews and things in 1998. Actually, the first issue was February of 98, so it's been over 25 years now. And since then, I've done a lot of freelance writing, and I started publishing Tales of Wonder and Dread books, which it's confusing. The book is called Tales of Wonder and Dread, but so is the publishing company. And it's devoted to science fiction and horror, which is why I figured I would do a collection. This is the 5th anniversary of Tales of Wonder and Dread, so I figured it was a perfect time for a collection with the same title and collecting the same types of stories. And the book actually has half science fiction and half horror stories, so I thought that was appropriate. But I started that 5 years ago, and I also do spooky ventures where I do spooky videos and things, and I have a lot of spooky merch you can buy. And so, because I'm into all things spooky, but I also love science fiction and music and all kinds of stuff. I'm sort of all over the place. So I guess that's kind of me.
Okay, perfect. Next, by the way, I just realized I realize these things sometimes delayed reaction, but you're all Rockford, Illinois here, correct? You're all Rockford, Illinois. It's funny, there was a wonderful movie called Silver Streak that came out, I don't know, in the 70s with Richard Pryor and I'm trying to remember
Gene Wilder, wasn't it?
Yeah, Gene Wilder. And they're on this runaway train. They're on this runaway train. It's a runaway train and it's going, 80, 90 miles an hour. It's not stopping. And it was supposed to stop, or it does make one stop before it becomes a runaway train at Rockford, Illinois. So that's my only, besides you guys, the only connection to Rockford. Anyway, Keith, the author of 4 novels and novellas and short stories and all kinds of stuff. Take it away.
Yes, I've been writing for quite a long time. I planned on doing 1 novel in my lifetime, and that was going to be it. And apparently that wasn't going to be it. I've actually got 2 novels in the pipeline. One of them's just about done. It's actually the follow-up to my last novel, which I wasn't planning on doing either. Doing a serial. But I had so much fun with that, I decided to do that. I actually started my own publishing imprint probably 8 or 9 years ago. The imprint publishes 91 titles. We have intellectual property rights to things other than my own stuff, to some other stuff as well. And so yeah, I do that. I run a machine shop as my day job. We've got 24 employees. So we make all sorts of mostly bespoke stuff. It's all onesie twosie stuff. Yeah, other than that, I'm pretty boring.
Okay, Patrick.
Thanks.
today-
Yeah,
Take it away.
my name is Patrick J. Murphy III. I've started writing really probably about 2016, and was published in an anthology through a library writing group. It's called The Writers on the Flocks. From that, I took my 2 stories and republished them in 2020 during the shutdown from COVID. So that was a good excuse of things to do while I'm sitting at home all day. I love selling the story. I love getting the words out there and getting emotional responses from people and things of that nature. Currently working on a young adult romance, paranormal neo-noir, and a paranormal investigation looking at vampires. So those are my 3 that I've kind of got going on in the back burners, and I'm hoping to get all those published within the next year.
Great, and I'm on my own. I just will be publishing this. There's a tortoise in my hair, a journey to spirit, in the next month. And because it's a big element of spirituality, which means I have this great kinship with you all, because under the big banner of horror, paranormal, sci-fi, fantasy, we can talk about things. Maybe just because I did read. I always like to get the flavor. I learned that from Johnny Carson. You gotta do your homework and get flavors. So if you want, so I read Know It All, Heath, and it was pretty powerful. Any comments about that, which is present in Tales of Wonder and Dread? Where do you come up with these ideas?
So that particular one, I don't know if you've ever read Nancy Kress, who was kind of the queen of short stories, wrote a book years and years ago, I think it was 85, called Beggars in Spain. And it's what she's most known for. And basically the premise of the book was you were able to genetically modify children so that they didn't need sleep. And what ultimately happened is the rest of society just kind of had nothing to do because the children were so dominant, and they basically sort of just became caretakers of the remainder of society. And a lot of them weren't exactly happy about it. It was kind of foisted upon them. And something struck me one day, and I thought, what would happen? Would it be a blessing or a curse to know absolutely everything? And so I decided to kind of see where that took me, and it kind of spooled out into this story where this individual is gifted this ability to basically know everything, predicated upon this implant, and it becomes almost too much for him. And I think that it's one of those situations where you really need to be careful what you wish for. I think we all want certain things, and even in life, in our own life, the things we can have, and yet we wish for these things. Sometimes we get them and we don't recognize the consequences that come with having those things or those abilities or those connections, if you will. And so that was kind of where I was going with that. A lot of my stories, I say this a lot, there are really 2 types of writers. There's planners and pantsers. Most people are planners. They outline everything. They study where they're going to go, how they're going to get there, at least to some degree. I don't do that. I probably should, but I don't. And a lot of times my stories take me places I never intended to go, and I just kind of follow them where they take me. And that's part of the reason I love not writing in any one genre. I have written pretty much every genre you can imagine, just because I like the challenge, I like the variety. And to me, I write for me first, and it's more of an outlet. It's more of something that I'm excited about, that I enjoy doing. And so, yeah, a lot of my short stories, I used to think they had to be absolutely grandiose. And then I realized that sometimes we can find grandiosity in even the smallest things. And so there are a number of short stories that I've written that are more like a folk tale, and things like that. But yeah, that's where that particular story is where the seed was planted was that book having made such an impression upon me. And that's one that I give away very often. I will gift that book very, very often because Nancy Kress, Beggar in Spain is just such a, it's just a phenomenal work.
Okay. Apparently, you know, the last part of it, pretty powerful. So I encourage people to read it. I mean, it was kind of gripping, so that I may truly know what it is to live, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's powerful stuff. Okay, moving along, Patrick, I did read The Beast. And I have to tell you, it was gripping. It was powerful. And early on, I was trying to find every way in my mind, jumping the gun to keep Liz. I'm not going to give stuff away, but I liked her. But anyway, so talk a little bit about the beat. Where do these, you know, impulses come from? The ideas come from?
So that was actually a short story exercise we did as a group when I was in the writing group. It was a 10-minute, you know, write what you can in 10 minutes. I took that and I just expanded on it a little bit and fleshed some things out. But I really think it kind of came from like watching crime dramas, you know, CSI, NCIS, you know, FBI, all those kind of things. Because but I wanted to look at, you know, what would happen if those something else besides a human is causing the crime. So I think that's where it really stems from. Is, you know, and a crime that's probably not going to be able to be solved. You know, when you watch crime dramas, they always, you know, they solve it in 45 minutes. They know, you know, they know all the incidents and all that. And it's like, well, that's not a fun, you know. Or I want to see, you know, something that might not be solved by those kind of programs or those kind of agencies. So I think that's where it really was the basis of it was, you know, again, that horror like feeling, and then what happens if something, you know, terrible happens that's not human, that's not solvable, that's not wrapped up in a bow.
It was pretty powerful, pretty graphic. So I was, you know, it was a tense read. Great imagination. Okay, Gary, I read The Wind. Again, another powerful ending. As a matter of fact, all three of you have, you know, I'm looking at, you know, I picked notes on all this stuff. Each one of you constructed a pretty powerful ending that you don't forget, which encourages people to want to read that. And by the way, the nice thing about this is these are quick interludes of reading to feel, you know, get your emotion, your blood flowing, and to get inside your heads. So talk about The Wind, Gary.
You know, of all of them, all of mine you picked out of there to read. The funny thing is, I can tell you almost nothing about how that story came about.
Oh.
I literally, a few years ago, was going through some old notebooks of mine and came across it and read it. I was like, well, I have no memory of ever writing this,
Wow.
but it's my handwriting. I wrote it.
Wow.
So I went ahead and typed it up and put it into one of my collections. And I think this might only be the second collection it's been in. I like the whole space marine kind of vibe to it. And I also like the ending of it. Again, I don't know where that one came from or when I wrote it or anything. It was just sitting in a notebook of mine.
Wow. Again, powerful stuff. You know, I latch on to emotionalities and things, and you know, a life that could have been. I mean, that's just powerful stuff. So all of that is in Tales of Wonder and Dread. So where can people, GaryHillAuthor.com, is that where they're going to find this?
Yeah, they can get it there or at lulu.com/spotlight/strange sound. Or if you go to talesofwonderandread.com, that takes you to the Tales of Wonder and Dread part of the GaryHillAuthor.com website.
Okay.
You can find all the Tales of Wonder and Dread books there.
I actually, commercially, I actually encourage people, it's thoroughly enjoyable for me. Again, I like these quick, I call them jolts. I like these quick jolts of literature. Sometimes in my crazy world, I'm not obliged to jump into novels, so I'm particularly drawn to the anthology you put together, and it's gripping stuff, and it's so diverse and imaginative that
Yeah, there are a lot of stories in there.
a lot of stories, a lot of
There are
stories.
a lot. It's a pretty massive book, actually.
Yeah,
I think it's 200 and 275 pages, no, 283 2 pages long. So it's one of the bigger collections I've put out, actually.
all right, so let's just kind of ask some panel type things. So and I like some of this stuff because I'm a writer kind of, and so what inspires each one of you to write paranormal fantasy, sci-fi, horror? What was the inspiration to get you into this, Gary?
For me, I think it really comes down to those are the kinds of things I'd like to read and the types of things I like to watch in terms of TV shows and movies. Basically, if you've got comic books, superhero comic books, or you've got science fiction, or you got horror, you got pretty much 90% of the stuff I like to watch or read. So I'm kind of drawn to the things I create. And, I think the stories that you consume, if they're working well, they get your imagination flowing. And so then your imagination tends to go in that sort of similar direction, I think. That's sort of the way I think anyway, I guess, when I'm looking. And, usually I'm looking to entertain myself with a story. I think, what if? And then start running with that. And then I think, okay, well, I can write that into something. And so that's sort of how that comes about.
Okay. Patrick.
I would agree with Gary. I think things that I like to read and things that I like to watch on TV and movies are major influences. I read a lot of fantasy. I read a lot of paranormal. I read a lot of those kind of things. So it's retelling of stories that I like to immerse myself with. It's a good escape. It's a good escape from reality sometimes, and especially sci-fi, horror, paranormal. Those are very deep escapes. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just getting away from reality sometimes.
Okay. And we need that. Boy, do we need that, getting away from reality. 15,000 people die in Libya in floods. It's the middle of the desert. And that's reality, and that's hard. And it's just to me, it's a great slap in the face. We ain't doing it climatologically. But anyway, Heath, take it away.
I'm actually completely different, unfortunately. I guess I'm the odd man out. I read everything I could get my hands on as a kid. It didn't matter what genre it was in. And my grandfather actually influenced me a lot. I didn't realize it was happening at the time, but he was an engineer at NASA, and I think he felt a kinship with me, and so we would talk about everything. I mean, just anything you can imagine. And so as I began to grow into my own life, I continued to read just all over the map. I mean, the books I read are just all over the map, and I enjoy that. And so I think what prompted me to write, first of all, was the challenge of it. And then I also wanted to write something that I wish had been written but hadn't been written. And so especially with my second novel, I really wanted to write something unique and something that hadn't been done before, and that would kind of resonate pretty much even after my death. I try to write stories that get a hold of your mind and your heart at the same time, whether you realize it's happening or not. And I think that's really, really important, because it's not just, for me, it's not just about telling a story. It's about literally just sucking everything that is that person into what's happening with those words. And it's a difficult thing to do sometimes, but when you do it right, it's just, it's really cathartic. It's really, it's something that really just blows me away when it's done right. There's so much stuff out there that's just okay, and there's so much stuff out there that's just kind of meh. And of course, we all have our own likes and our own dislikes, but there are a handful of novels when you read them and you just sit back and you just go, oh my God, did I just read that? Did I just absorb that story? Holy cow. And that's the kind of stuff that I have always aspired to write. And I don't know that I'll ever get there, but I really do try.
Good question at this juncture, and it's a two-parter. I always like to ask this because it kind of lights. It's very incandescent. So, what are your favorite horror, sci-fi, fantasy, paranormal books and movies? Part two of the question is, the movie aspect. I'm an old movie guy. And we may have talked about this in one of our past, but on the horror side, I got reinvigorated to horror when I watched that movie Fright Night. If you guys have seen it,
The original one with Roddy McDowell.
yeah, and the kids and Stephen Jeffries, the kid who gets bitten by a vampire, but the movie is a contemporary. It's a contemporary vampire story that's done, in the 80s. I guess it came out in the 80s, maybe 90s. But it was gripping and it was real. And if anybody, there's a ton of people that don't know anything about, Bela Lugosi, but they're seeing this and it's believable, and it leaves me, emotionally, it's like, wow. So favorite, favorite horror, fantasy, paranormal books and movies, and Patrick, start.
All right. I would say for sci-fi books, at least, Michael Crichton. I've read a lot of his books. I've read a lot of his things, and I like him. I like, because I think that he takes science and dumbs it down enough that people can understand it, but still gives it a fantastical, element to it. As far as horror, I probably haven't read that much. I've read the classics. I've read, Dracula. I've read Frankenstein. I've read, some of those things. Poe, a little bit of things of that nature. But I'd say more for like movies, I'd probably say like psychological thrillers, the Hannibal series, the a little bit of the Exorcist, Aliens, things of that nature. Things that were, which Aliens, of course, is a great sci-fi and horror because it's a great mashup of the two genres. So.
Keith.
So horror's never really been my jam. There's actually one horror movie, and I only mean one, unfortunately, that really just stuck with me and just knocked my socks off. And a lot of people hated it, and that was the Blair Witch Project. We've talked about this. Gary and I have talked about this before. And I think part of what appealed to me about that was because it was believable, and throughout the whole entire thing up to the end, you thought you were going to find out what was happening, and you never really knew. And I think for some strange reason, I appreciated that ending. As far as horror writing goes, probably the single best piece I have ever read, and again, it's something that people either love or hate, and that is Mark Danielewski's House of Leaves. That book was recommended to me by a friend. A couple other people said, you do not want to read that. And I did, I read it. I couldn't put the damn thing down. I wanted to know what was happening. And it was just so bizarre and so strange and so fresh. And I absolutely loved it. I thought it was brilliant. And again, I probably 80% of the people I recommend it to hate it. They don't even finish it. But it's one of those things where I think it either resonates with you or you don't. And I think part of it is you have to have an active imagination to make the book work. And which is kind of, it's cool, but it's also a poverty at the same time. As far as science fiction goes, I've never really been much of a sci-fi person per se. I really, really like Robert Charles Wilson stuff, just because he always finds these strange bents. I love Neil Gaiman. I followed him since the early days of the Sandman. And Terry Pratchett's another one when it comes to fantasy. Terry Pratchett was someone I wanted to, when I started writing the Unseen series, he was someone I wanted to sort of emulate, but in a completely different way. And that's why I set everything in modern times with a completely different cast of characters. But it was sort of done with his writing as something of a bedrock. It gave me a really good ground floor plan of what works and what doesn't. And I really appreciated that. And his passing was a hard hit, because I always look forward to his next big thing. And it was so sudden. It was so sudden how quickly he died. And to my knowledge, he is actually the single best-selling author in the world.
Oh,
I think, statistically speaking. So yeah, that was a blow.
wow. Gary.
Okay, well, in terms of horror books, probably three stand out for me. And one I know is billed as nonfiction, and frankly, it's not, which is the Amityville Horror, which I remember I got as a gift when I was, I think it was my 14th or 15th birthday. And I read that thing cover to cover over the course of a weekend and was just completely engrossed in it. And then probably The Exorcist would be another one. And then, of course, The Shining. Those are probably my three big ones for horror books. For movies, I think my favorite horror movie for years was John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness. But recently I've changed, and it's A Color Out of Space by Richard Stanley with Nick Cage, the adaptation of Lovecraft, which is just it's a piece of art, but it's also, gory and crazy, and it has the same sort of, one of the elements that I like, I'm a big John Carpenter fan, and one of the elements I like about John Carpenter movies is they have a sort of snowball effect, in that it starts very small, and that just one little thing sort of happens, and then a little more, and then a little more, and before you know it, you're in the middle of this thing, and it's like it's just completely berserk or crazy, and it's like, where did that come from? And so I really appreciate that, and Color Out of Space is the same way. It has a lot of that too. I mean, it just is completely berserk by the time it's over. But and Lovecraft is really, really hard to adapt to film. And Stanley did a great job of taking it and bringing it into the contemporary era. He took a lot of license with it and a lot of liberties with it, but yet I think he really captured all the important stuff too, which was great. As far as science fiction, the book that comes to mind for me, well, there are actually two, but I can't remember who wrote the one. Rendezvous with Rama, which I think might be Andre Norton. If not, it's
Arthur C. Clarke, wasn't it?
Arthur C. Clarke. That's the other thing I was thinking it could be. Yeah, that's a really, really good book. And I also love, I know some people might not think this is science fiction, but I believe that alternate realities are science fiction. And the book Fatherland by Robert Harris, I absolutely love. And they made a movie of that. The movie wasn't very good. It was really dull and boring. But it's an alternate history where Germany actually won World War II. They developed the bomb first, and it's 1963, and Europe is completely occupied, and they're still fighting on the Russian front. the United States and US have a treaty, and they don't, or I mean, United States and Germany have a treaty, and President Joseph Kennedy is going over to meet with the Fuhrer, and there's a killing of a Nazi officer, which winds up an investigation into it reveals all kinds of things going on that's been hidden, like the Holocaust has been hidden, and so it's a pretty cool book. But the movie was not that good. For science fiction movies, I tend to go with things like the Star Trek movies. I'm a Star Trek nut, so I love those movies. And Planet of the Apes, the original 5, those are brilliant. Omega Man was another one of mine.
Love that. Love that.
In fact, all the versions of that story I've liked. Last Man on Earth, I Am Legend. I like all the versions I've seen of that story.
Okay. I'm going to answer my own question. I get chilled over The Exorcist, and I use my pharmaceutical background when I first read it, and they're calling I guess Reagan had Tourette's syndrome, and she was uttering these terrible things. But for me, I couldn't process, and what was really horror about it is I couldn't process how a little girl her age using those words that she used, really bad curse words, how she could have ever have heard those words in her environment. So she didn't. So there was an element in my mind. There's an element in my mind. You're talking about possession, and I don't want to say there is or there isn't, but I want to know how she learned some of those terrible words. So there has to be an element, and it made me think, well, maybe she's possessed, maybe she does need an exorcist. And the only way they treated her was giving her like massive doses of Thorazine and these powerful hypnotic sedatives. But I was very William Peter Blatty wrote that, and it just left me, what the hell is going on? And the other thing, to provoke discussion, we have Frankenstein, which is it's almost 30 years old, and now we have AI. And I went to a conference some years ago, a Singularity conference, and there was a Russian scientist there, and you have Ray Kurzweil. You had 1 million people. Ken Jennings, the guy who won Jeopardy and won all that money. You had all these thinkers talking about different aspects of the future. And you had this Russian scientist who was working on transferring everything up here in our brain via whatever, maybe it's a USB thing, into a cyborg to give eternal life to someone like Frankenstein. So in my mind, as I'm learning about AI, and I'm remembering this lecture I went to 10 or 15 years ago, where they're talking about and after all, what are we? Well, our essence is right up here. You can hook a wire up here and transfer that in with cyborg. But anyway, that science fiction, but maybe it's not that far away. Anyway, that's my thought. Okay, moving on. I always like to ask, where do you come up with your inspirations to do things? Gary?
Oh, mine come all kinds of different places. I just will get an idea and run with it, and then sometimes I'll get an idea to like the old Doctor Who from the 70s. I remember reading that most of those they wrote, basically they take old mythology stories and just redo them as Doctor Who stories. And so sometimes I might rethink a story that's something older. And
I gotta stop 1 second. I think, Patrick, we're getting a lot of interference from you. Maybe until you speak, maybe mute yourself. we're getting, it's really loud.
Yeah, there we go.
There we
All
go.
right, better. Okay, finish, Gary.
Yeah, so maybe sometimes I might come up with an old story that I really like and come up with a way to rethink it in a different way, or and then there are all kinds of different ways. Sometimes I'll even come up with stories in a dream and sit down later and try to write it out when they actually make sense. Once in a while they do. Funny thing is, I've actually wound up inside some of the worlds I've created in my stories too, in my dreams. So, which can be cool, but it can also be pretty crazy.
Okay. Heath,
Yeah, so actually, it's funny that you mentioned dreams. My very first novel was predicated upon a very vivid dream I had. I'm a vivid, lucid dreamer. I mean, like, we're talking Hollywood blockbuster productions with music and everything. I don't know why my brain does what it does. But yeah, that's where my first novel actually started. And then it just kind of, it's a good old fashioned apocalypse story. But I thought, what would happen if the writers of the apocalypse had kind of just been like doing their thing for years, and now they're finally called upon to do the thing they're meant to do, and they're really unhappy about it. So I wrote Death is a Drunk, and I wrote, a war basically had to hold them all together, and it was just all holding together by a thread. And it was kind of fun to write it that way, just a sort of a modern retelling of the apocalypse that hadn't quite been done that way before. The other thing is my brain is constantly moving, which is a blessing and a curse. And so I probably think of 10 writing prompts that just smack me in the face every day. Well, what if this? Well, what if this? Well, what if this? And sometimes they're so powerful that they stick with me until I actually end up writing a story or a book about it. And I like that. I like that my brain thinks that way, because so many people struggle for ideas. And to me, it's a blessing that I'm actually smacked in the face with so many ideas every day that are all relatable and workable. And I also, a lot of times I will read something, and as I'm reading it and as I'm understanding how the author is probably expecting me to infer it, my brain takes it a step further, or it takes a sidetrack, and there I see a potential for a story as well. And most of the time, these stories, I wrote a poem about it's called Untold, and it's basically about where stories go to die that never get told because there are so many of them. And I wrote that because that's kind of how my life is. There are so many stories I will never write that I really wish I could if I had the time. But yeah, I mean, my inspirations predominantly come from there, just from my mind spooling out and once in a while a vivid dream.
Patrick.
So I came from a theater background, and I was doing movies and wanting to direct and things of that nature. So I always had that idea of wanting to tell a story. Things in my life didn't necessarily go the way I thought they were going to go when I was, 18. But I still want to be able to tell those stories. I still want to be able to express that, that thought. So I think a lot of mine, at least developmentally, come from like a movie thinking, like how can I make this into a movie, or how can I make this into a visual representation? But then I just take inspiration from other things, like from other things I've read, other things I've seen, conversations I've had with people in my real life, and just rework those and remake them into something new. So
Okay, kind of winding down, two cerebral questions to ask, I think, and they're short. Basically, I like these questions, and it kind of gets into your head. So here goes cerebral question number one. What would constitute a perfect day for you, Patrick?
I think a perfect day for me would be being able to sleep in, and enjoy a nice, relaxing breakfast where I don't have to feel like I have to get to work at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then being able to read or be able to watch TV, be able to just not have to have a worry about other things outside of outside of my own body, outside of my own mind. And then finishing the day with getting to write, getting to sit down at my computer knock out, 1,000 words or 2,000 words or whatever it is that day, and just be happy that I was able to do that.
Can I make an addendum to what you just said? And Ohio State winning the national championship, right?
Guys, yes.
Okay, okay. Same thing goes with Illinois, guys, Heath.
So for me, I think I would be on an all-inclusive cruise, and I would be hanging out with Eugene Kranz, Cal Ripken, Betty White, Tina Fey, and Nikola Tesla. Just hanging out and eating all day. I think that would do it.
That's neat. That's neat. Gary.
Well, I'm sort of all over the place in terms of my likes, and so it would all depend on the day. I guess being with my wife would have to be part of it, but beyond that, whatever we decided to do, would just be, if to have the time and the money and the resources to just go and do whatever you wanted to do that day, I guess. At the spur of the moment, if you decided on it.
Okay.
That would probably be it.
Okay. Last question, and actually it's almost kind of tied into what I just asked, but it may go beyond that. So fill in the blank. Before I leave this earth, I won't be satisfied until I blank. Gary.
Boy, I just sort of there are places I'd like to go. I mean, I got bucket list stuff like everybody, and I think that probably I won't ever achieve all of them. I don't know that I could pick any one. One of the things I've been trying to do is get as much stuff out there published as possible. One of my philosophies on Tales of Wonder and Dread the Publisher is that I don't really worry about whether a book is going to sell or not. Don't get me wrong, I want them to sell, but my whole viewpoint is I want to publish books that I want on my bookshelf, because I want those passed down to the future generations to still be out there in the future. So I guess, that's probably what the big goal is to get as much stuff out there. But again, I know when I do finally leave this mortal coil, there are going to be things that I've left unfinished. I'm sure of it. And so there's no way of getting around that. Because you know what? I wouldn't be reaching for things if there were things that weren't unfinished by the time I'm done. So,
okay, Heath.
So for me, I've always said, imagine the worst snowstorm on a terrible day where you have to drive really, really far, and the most number of people possible are emotionally compelled to come and pay their last respects to me. And what I mean by that is that I have impacted people's lives in such a positive way that they would feel compelled to come and pay their respects. And that sounds really self-aggrandizing, and I don't mean it that way. At the end of the day, I want to have made a difference. I want to have had an impact on people's lives that is strong and meaningful and lasting. And that's what I strive for. And that's part of what makes me happy. It's part of what makes me me, and it's part of what I enjoy living for. I know it sounds kind of corny, but
No, it ain't. No, it ain't. For sure. Identify with that. Patrick.
I would say, kind of building on what Heath said, having an impact, emotionally, mentally, being bigger than some authors that are out there. And I'd also like to go around the world in 80 days.
Okay. That's great. Well, guys, this was fun. It's always fun hanging around Gary and Heath. We've done this a few times, and Patrick, it's great to meet you. This is fun. We're here because of Tales of Wonder and Dread. GaryHillAuthor.com, and I can attest to its gripping reading. And it's so diversified and so varied. It's a fun. Well, it's not fun. There's heavy stuff here, but it's a fun read because it's so. I've said the word a few times tonight. Imaginative. So, wishing everybody a happy Halloween. Because it's just about here when this goes up. So happy Halloween, Gary. To be continued. Heath, Patrick, this is a great little panel. You guys have been great, and you've shared. And I thank you. And I'm going to stop recording now. Any last comments, Gary, Heath, Patrick?
I just wanted to say, just for everybody out there, we're not the only people in the book, though. There are a lot of other great writers. There are quite a few people featured here. So you get a really nice sampling of different writers and different styles. And
Okay, perfect. All right, I'm gonna stop the recording. This really was great. Actually, it was sumptuous. It's one of my favorite words, sumptuous. And don't leave, because we're gonna just do a 2-minute wrap, but I'll stop the recording. Thank you, guys. To be continued.